Hello, and welcome to Coordonix. Today we're going to dive into a topic that can completely transform your workflow. DotFiles. These hidden configuration files are the secret weapon behind a highly efficient, personalized, and a consistent system setup. Whether you're a developer, an IT professional, or just somebody who just Hello, and welcome to Coordonix. Today we're going to dive into a topic that can completely transform your workflow. DotFiles. These hidden configuration files are the secret weapon behind a highly efficient, personalized, and consistent system setup. Whether you're a developer, an IT professional, or just someone who loves to optimize their workspace, mastering your DotFiles will make your life so much easier. By the end of this video, customize your environment with vimrc and bashrc files, use .local files for machine-specific tweaks or overrides, and automate file templates within Vim. So let's get started with the basics. What are .files? Well, .files are hidden configuration files that start with a dot, like .bashrc or .vimrc. They define how your shell, your text editor, or other tools behave. So why are they important? Because they ensure consistency across multiple systems. You can save time with custom shortcuts and automations. And you can even tailor your environment to match your personality. Think of them as the backbone of your system's personality. All right, so first, what we're going to do is we're going to jump into GitHub and create a repository to house all of our configuration files. On GitHub, we click Create Repository. I'm actually going to call this .files. I don't need a description, and I'm just going to keep it public because I want you guys to be able to download this or look back on it if you need to. I'm going to hit Create Repository, click SSH, and then I'm going to copy this SSH command. That's it. So now let's get into WSL. Let's open up WSL. We're going to change the directory to our GitHub repos into our Coordonix folder. Just go to wherever you're housing all of your repos. Now let's list the contents. Now, if we do LA, there's nothing in here. That's because this is going to be our first repo. I know in the last video, we did create a test repo, but we've deleted that. That was purely to make sure that we actually had connection. So now we're going to do git clone and paste what we copied from GitHub earlier. We hit enter, and now we've cloned the empty repository. Let's change directory and get into the file that we just put in there. Let's go ahead and clear the screen. And now that we're in the repo, let's think about what we're going to do and how we want to organize it. I know that I'm going to do some configs for Vim and Bash. So let's go ahead and house all of those in their own folder. So we'll do make directory Vim, and we're also going to make another directory called Bash. Now, the other thing I need is I'm going to make another directory called images. This is going to be for the GitHub repos README file. We'll talk about that a little bit later. A big part of my config files is actually called resources. So I'm going to make a directory called resources as well. This houses some templates and some other things. Again, we'll talk about it when we get to that point. So now let's talk about Vim. So let's change directory. We're going to go ahead and go into the Vim file. I have two specific things that I do want to talk about. One is regarding Vim, and the other is regarding the resources folder. So within Vim, the big file that we need is called vimrc. The vimrc is the main configuration that tells Vim how to act, what to do, how to look, things like that. And thanks to the power of the internet and open source, I actually didn't have to create a vimrc. There's one online on GitHub that I actually really enjoy, and it was recommended to me. So let's come over to GitHub. And if you look, there's a user named ChrisDean258 who also has a repo called .files. Inside of this, he has his vimrc along with other things if you're interested in checking them out. So what we need to do is actually download that vimrc. To do that, we're going to go back to our WSL. So to download the file itself into the Vim directory, we just need to use a wget command. So we'll type wget https://raw.github-user-content.com. We'll put his username, so ChrisDean258, slash .files slash master slash .vimrc. And that's it. We hit enter and we'll see that it's downloaded. It's 100% downloaded and it's saved. So now if we do ls, well, wait a minute, there's nothing there. That doesn't make any sense. It says it downloaded. The reason is because it's a dot file. Remember, it's a hidden configuration file. So to find these, we need to do LA. And you'll see there's the .vimrc. So let's go ahead and open it and take a look. So if we do vim.vimrc and hit enter, and there it is. All of this code is actually used to show Vim what we want it to do, how we want it to act, things like that. If we go to the bottom of the file by Shift G, you'll see that this is 1,176 lines of code, and we didn't have to type it thanks to GitHub. Chris, we appreciate it. This vimrc is awesome. So let's get out of this file. We're going to actually change the directory back one folder. So now let's talk about the README file. A README file is a document that lets other people know in every repo that we have what that repo is about. So what is it about? How is it used? Things like that. After typing up a bunch of README documents, I wanted to standardize the look of my README. So I ended up going online, scouring the internet and trying to find a couple of different examples to find things that I liked. I ended up finding the best README template by Othniel Drew on GitHub. This README file has all of the information that I could want in a README file. I mean, it's very well laid out, very well organized. I'm just going to kind of scroll through here so you can see the information that is in the actual GitHub repos README file. You can see how it's laid out, what information is there. You can see the roadmap and things that have already happened and things that are planned to happen. The contributing section, licenses, contact information, and acknowledgements. So now we're going to open up the blank README file. This is his actual template. So if you take this file, you can just edit the information. He even tells you that this is the blank template, and to avoid retyping too much information, just do a simple search and replace for these terms, and it will replace throughout the entire document and be ready to go for you. As I said before, in the description below, I have a link to both Chris Dean's vimrc repo and Othniel Drew's README template file. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create the documents within the Vim, bashrc, and resources folder. That way I can save a little bit of time, and I'll just kind of pull up each one and kind of explain what it's doing and why I use it. Okay, now that we have all the files generated, let's go ahead and change directory, and we'll just go back into the Vim file, for example. So if I list the contents of this directory, you'll see that there's the Vim file, which we've already talked about, but there's also a vimrc.local. So if we take a look at it, inside of the vimrc.local, we're using some configuration to actually overwrite what the vimrc is doing. But we're also using it to set up some things that are not in the original vimrc. So we'll look at this section called Python. There's one command that says anytime a new file is created with any name .py, then copy the file that is in home resources skeleton.py. The reason we're doing this is because that file has a bunch of information in it that I'm going to put in every single Python document that I use. So why retype it? Let's just make a boilerplate template and then automatically populate it whenever we generate a new document. So if you look, I'm actually doing that for Python, Windows batch file, README documents, changelog documents, and Windows PowerShell scripts. That's a lot of stuff that we don't have to type anymore because we've typed it once and made it a template. So let's go ahead and save this. We'll get out. We're going to go back, and now we're going to go into the bash folder. So you'll see that we have two files, the bashrc and a bash aliases file. One thing to note is that the bashrc file really doesn't have a lot in it that isn't in the original file. There are going to be two things that you want to make sure. One, you want to make sure there is an if statement that is looking for a home directory bash aliases document. And then we've also created the bashrc.local, so we want to do the same exact thing with that document. So let's go ahead and save out of that, and let's take a look at the bash aliases. This is where you can do custom commands and really ramp up your production. So starting at the top, we've created a few aliases. You've all seen me go back a folder and do cd space ... So change directory and go back one level. Well, instead of doing cd space ... now we can just do ... Or if we want to go back 2 directories, we can do 3 dots. 3 directories is 4. You can do this as many times as you want to. 3 seems to be enough for me. Another convenient alias that I created is rzone. So I've told rzone to remove any file that has :zone.i afterward. I did this because since we're using Linux within Windows, sometimes when you're moving files around, it will actually generate new files. So for example, if I have a file called file.txt and I move it around, sometimes it may generate a new document called file.txt: zone.identifier. This file, from my understanding, just holds information that Windows uses to look at like security information about the file. It actually doesn't hold any contents of the file itself. So we don't really need that document. So I've created an rzone that just removes all of those files from whatever directory we're currently in. Now let's talk about the git section. Git has a lot of different commands like git status or git add or the git commit -m for the message. What we can do is instead of typing all of those full length commands, we've just made little shortcuts. So for git status, I did GST. Git add is just GA. But if I want to add all documents, it's GA period to git add .all. I have a simple one for git commit messages, for a blank git commit message, for pushing and pulling to a repo. But then I also have the powerhouse, which is called gsave. Gsave does a few different things. So let's go through step by step. So what this is doing is it's going to use less to display the contents of a file. In this case, it's going to home, resources, and getsave.notes. It will show me that file until I hit Q to exit out of it. Then it'll ask me, enter commit message. I type in whatever commit message I want, I hit enter, and then it does some commands for me that I've set up here as aliases. So it does GA period, which is git add all files. Then it does get commit message and puts the message that we already typed as the message for the commit, and then it pushes it to GitHub for us. It does all of these commands in one simple gsave alias. Talk about a time saver. I've also created a few aliases for convenient things. For example, I can type aliases and it'll pull up this exact document. That way I can just, if I had an idea for a new alias, I could create it real quick. Or if I just needed to look if something's not working correctly, I can just pop it up real quick and be like, hey, I misspelled this. Then I created one for vimrc and bashrc, which actually opens the vimrc itself and the vimrc local side by side. Bash does the same thing with bashrc and bashrc.local. And that's everything for bash. So let's go ahead and save and get out of the file. And let's go take a look at the resources folder. This is where everything really gets tied together. So let's clear the screen. Inside of the resources folder, you'll see I have a few different files. So I have a changelog MD, the GPL license document, an MIT license document, and the README. This README is actually the template from Othniel Drew. However, I've gone in and changed the GitHub_username to my username. I've updated the contact information to be my email, things like that. That way I don't have to retype all that information every single time. Then I have the get saved notes. Get saved notes, if you remember, is displayed whenever we use gsave. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what get saved notes is. Whenever we type gsave, it pops up this document that says commit message guidelines. The reason I wanted to do this is I want all of my commit messages to be similar in syntax. So the first thing I want to have is a tag, which is going to be this left-hand column here, letting me know what is this commit about. So for example, if there's a new feature, I type feat, and then I type what the new feature is. If I am fixing a bug, I do fix, and whatever the bug was, and so on and so forth down the line. So after typing gsave, it displays this document. You look through it and decide which one you're going to use. And then it tells you, after deciding, hit Q to exit and then enter your command message to finalize. The last thing in the file is all of these skeleton docs. So the skeleton docs are actually template files. Earlier, we were talking about the Python file. So let's go ahead and go into Vim, look at the skeleton.py. If you look at this document, you'll see that it has the shebang at the top telling you it's Python. It has a spot for you to type a description. It tells you some information about the GNU GPL license. And then there's a bunch of tags for every single Python file that I'm going to use. So then I can just come in here, update the year, update the date that this was actually published, and any other information that is relevant. I also have some notes at the bottom to remind me what the semantic versioning is. So you can see it starts with 001 for like an alpha build, which means that there isn't really a major update. There's not really a minor update, and I'm just kind of patching this thing together. But once it's ready to go, I'll actually publish version 1.0. I just started with 001 because anytime you're creating a new file, well, you don't have anything, so you're starting at the bottom. So now if we get out of this file, you'll see the batch file and the PowerShell script. It's the same exact information, just in the actual format used by PowerShell and Windows bat files. The last thing I wanted to look at was the changelog. So if we go into Vim and take a look at the changelog, you'll see the file that we use within repos to actually document what has changed within the projects. So I have changelog as a header. All notable changes to this project will be documented in this file, and it lets you know that we're using a format based off keep a changelog and the semantic versioning. We also have my cheat sheet here for the semantic versioning, just as a simple reminder. So next is the unreleased section, but let's skip that for a second and go straight to the versions. When the first version is published, I come in here and say this is version 1.0.0. It was published on this date, and then here's what all has happened to get that version to where it is. You'll see that I have notes here as well for similar formatting to the git commit messages. So if I fix something, I type fixed : and whatever the bug was. Added for a new feature, removed if I remove a feature, so on and so forth. So the first thing below the unreleased section will be the most current build that is published. So for example, if we're on version 1.0.0, that's what you'll see here and any changes used to get to that point. But let's say that we're working on a new implementation and we're going to have some new functionality. So now we're going to go to 1.1.0. Well, we're not quite there yet, but anything that I do, anything I fix or implement or remove needs to be kept track of under unreleased. That way, when it's released, I can just move that section down a little bit and put the header at the top to let you know, hey, here's the new version. All of the work has been kept track of the entire time. It's a system that works really well for me, and it always keeps your most recent published version at the top. Then at the very bottom, you'll see the actual links to go to GitHub to look at the information through their platform. So now let's take a look at what we have. We have our images folder with an image in there, the resources folder with all of the information we want, the Vim and Bash folders with all of the config files for those respective documents types. So now let's take a look at what we have. You'll see that we have the Bash and Vim folders that have both. So now let's take a look at what we have. We have the Bash, images, resources, and Vim, all filled with the documents that we want. Now all we need to do is create the install file. Let me create that real quick, and then I'll get right back to you. Okay, so we've created a new document called install.sh. If we hit LL, you'll see that this document has read and write and read permissions. Well, that's no good because we need to execute this script. So we need to change the permissions. We'll do chmod 755 and the name of the file. We hit enter, and now if we do LL, you'll see that it's green, and it's because it has execute commands. Perfect. So let's go ahead and clear this. So now let's talk about the install file itself. First, we're going to start out with the shebang that lets the executable know that it's a bash script. We created a function to display a help menu. And then we're going to look and make sure that an argument is ran. So whenever you run this script, you'll do /install.sh, and then we need an argument. Now, the available arguments are talked about up here at the top. You can type help, vim, bash, resources, or all. So if an argument is not run, then it displays the help menu. Then we're going to validate to make sure that the argument that actually is run is something that we can recognize. So first, if they run help, then it's going to display the help menu. If they run vim bash resources or all, then it echoes and just displays on the screen, hey, you've selected this option. So if they type an argument that isn't recognized, then it displays the help menu and then it just exits the program. Now we look at the actual install itself. So the first thing we do now is we define the backup directory. Since we're installing files, we want to make sure that if you have an existing file, like the bashrc, then we're not going to just delete it or override it. We want to take your original bashrc, rename it, and move it to a backup folder. This backup folder is known as the variable backup_dir, and it's in home, just called backup configs. Now that we have it defined, let's check to make sure it exists. If there isn't a directory that is known as backup configs, then it tells you that it's going to create one, it creates it, and then it tells you that it's created. If there already is a backup configs, then it says, hey, you already have this. And it shows you the path. The next section is the main portion of the actual install. But before we get into that, let's kind of talk about the arguments. So if someone types vim or all, then we need it to do deploy files for the vim folder. So if we come back up to the top, you'll see that we're looking for a source directory, which is the first argument here. And then we're also looking for the file type, which is the second argument. So then it says, hey, we're processing vim configuration files. For every file that is in the vim directory within the repo, we're going to do a few things to it. So first, we're going to check to make sure that that file doesn't exist already in the home drive. If it does, then we're actually going to rename that file with the timestamp. So you'll see that it's the backup directory, the original file name, a timestamp, which has the 4-digit year, 2-digit month and day, period, hour, minute, and seconds. Then it adds .bak at the end for a backup. It will rename that file, and then it moves it to the backup configs folder. After the file is moved and renamed into the backup configs file, we're actually going to create a symbolic link from the repo that you have back to the home directory where vimrc and bashrc are actually looking for those files. Then it just starts looping and doing that for every single file within that folder. You'll see that we have the arguments for vim, for when vim or all is ran, for bash, when bash or all is ran, and then we also have the same exact functionality whenever someone types resources or all. So if I go back to the home directory and I list to see what files are there, you'll see that I don't have a backup configs folder. If I do LA, you'll see that I have a bashrc, but I don't have a vimrc or anything like that. So perfect. Now let's go ahead and go back to GitHub repos, Coordonix, and then DotFiles. Now let's actually execute our install. So let's clear the screen. We're going to do install.sh, but we're not going to put an argument. Now, if you remember from the file, it should display a help menu. So let's hit enter. Perfect. We have our usage. It's saying, hey, do ./install.sh, and then pick an option. Here are the options you can choose. So let's go ahead and do, for example, let's do the vim files. So we'll do install.sh, and then we'll do vim. If we hit enter here, it shows that we selected option vim. It's creating the directory for us. It's now created. Now it's processing the vim files, and you'll see a file doesn't exist. There isn't a vimrc. So now it's going to create the symbolic link and move on to the next one. Well, there's also not a vimrc.local. So let's go ahead and create a symbolic link to that as well. Great. So if we go back and we do LA, now I have a vimrc and a vimrc.local. Well, perfect. This is working great so far. You can even see a backup configs folder. So now let's go back to our GitHub Coordonix .files and let's install everything. We hit all, and everything happened exactly the way that we would expect, except I do want to point out, if you remember up here, we did vimrc and vimrc.local. Well, now when you process the vim files, you'll see that it's backing up the vimrc. It's putting it in the backup configs folder. It's adding the date and the time .bak. It did the same thing for vimrc.local, and then it moved on and kept going through each individual file. So perfect. Let's clear the screen, go back to home. We'll do LA, or actually, let's change directory into the backup configs folder. If we do LA now, you'll see, well, it backed up our bashrc, the vimrc, and the vimrc local that we had. So the backup is working great. We'll go back to home and search for everything. Now we have our bash aliases, bashrc, vimrc, vimrc.local, and we even have our resources drive. So everything looks like it's working great. The last thing I want to do is I actually want to exit out of the program, and let's open it back up. The reason I did that is I wanted to make sure that bash actually had all of my latest configs. So now let's just test one of the aliases. I should be able to type aliases, and if I hit enter, I should see the aliases file that we looked at earlier. Perfect. You'll also notice that the file looks completely different. There's some pink, some light blues, things like that. It looks like it's a lot easier to read now than it was earlier with that dark blue text. That tells me that our vimrcs are also working. So let's get out of this file. We'll clear the screen, and let's go back to our DotFiles repo. So now let's push what we have up to the GitHub repo. So if I do GST, if you remember, that's get status, and hit enter, well, you'll see that there haven't been any commits yet, and it's not tracking anything. We needed to track all of it. So let's go ahead and do gsave. If you remember, gsave actually adds all of the files within the directory, and then it commits and pushes it all at once. So let's see if the gsave alias works. If you remember, it should pop up that getsave.notes. We'll hit enter, and there it is. Since this is the first GitHub repository and we haven't actually pushed anything or committed anything yet, we're really kind of adding a feature. So I'm going to use the feat tag. I'm going to hit Q, enter the commit message. I'm going to say feat. And well, what did we do? We added configuration files for vim, bash, and also additional resources. We also added an installation script. Okay, everything looks good. Let's hit enter, and it should actually commit for us. If I pull back up our GitHub repo, if I refresh, there's everything. So you'll see our bash file, images, resources, vim, and our install.sh. But one thing's missing. We don't have our README. Let's go ahead and fix that real quick. So now you can see that we've added our license file and our README document. Let's do GST again. Neither one has actually been added, so let's gsave again. So this time we're going to use docs. We're only affecting documentation. So we have a new license document and the README document. So let's hit Q, docs, and then I've just added README and license files. I'll go ahead and clear that, and then let's go back to our GitHub. If I refresh again, look at that. Now we have our README file and our MIT license. So scrolling through here, you can see this is the DotFiles. I just put an image. It's a configuration files. There's our collapsible table of contents. And then all of the other information, including the prerequisites, the steps to install, how to use it. And then if you look here, there's a roadmap. We wanted to make sure that we had an installation script to back up existing configuration files and then create symbolic links to the new configurations. Well, we've already done that, so we'll just check that off. Then you'll see the contributing stuff. If you feel like I've left something out, here's how you can contribute. Here's the top contributors, what license that we're using, the contact information for me, and at the bottom, I have an acknowledgement section where I have links to Othniel Drew for his fantastic README template, Chris Dean for creating the foundational vimrc file that I use. I also want to throw a big thanks to Brent Hurst for mentoring me on my journey into Bash, Vim, and Linux. Your guidance and knowledge has been awesome, and I honestly really appreciate the time and the effort that you've put into helping me out. This is just my way of helping pay it forward for anybody else that could use this information. And I think that's it. We have our installation file, the README and the license document, and then all of the configuration files organized neatly into folders. So I think we're pretty much done with this repo. DotFiles are more than just configuration files. They're a way to take control of your tools, boost productivity, and make your workflow truly yours. Whether it's customizing Vim, optimizing your shell, or streamlining Git, mastering DotFiles is going to be a game changer for any tech enthusiast. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this, and let me know in the comments, what's your favorite DotFile trick? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.